Boa tarde. Good afternoon. Welcome to the still waiting for some people to get in. Thank you. I'd like to welcome to this afternoon of Mais Casas Seminar, and it's with great pleasure. It's a pleasure and a joy to be here, and I salute Teresa and Luis for this initiative and for their generosity also, and somehow sense of mission in this very worrying situation in which we are, as we saw this morning, not only in Portugal but around Europe. But my role is to present our speakers in this afternoon. So it's with great pleasure that I present to you Sophie Devrent, from Agora Studio in Belgium. Agora Studio, it's a very interesting practice, very heterodox, I would say, because of the various scales, mixed programs, attitudes, new buildings, renovations. It's you should visit their site and their works. And I will quote something that somehow I totally agree. Agora devotes a great deal of effort to understanding the fundamental issues at stake in each project. Formulating the problem correctly is an important step towards solving it. I couldn't agree more. I'm also a practitioner. I have a studio, so I recognize myself in these words. And Sophie, as you see, is very young, but she joined Agora in 2016, but Agora exists since 2003. And we are very curious to hear you. And of course, it's also a great pleasure to present João Machado and his studio, Studio Coletivo 8, or Studio 8. One of his partners, Laura Lupini, is also here. And I knew Oito because of a book they published, Yellow Red. I don't know if you know this book, but it's mandatory to have this book and to know this book, because it's traditionally yellow-red drawings are considered very ugly and binary, and they transform this reflection in something very, very beautiful and important in those circumstances and situations that we have to work with existing matter. I follow them closely. I'm a fan of his works, and also because I recognize some spirit of Porto in what they do, to be really local and really global, as Porto always was. This is not exclusive from Lisbon. I also, by Oito, had the chance to meet one of their close friends, Martin Bosch, that was involved also in Yellow Red, and that's one of the, he has his own studio at Mendrisio where both of you collaborated, Studio Riuso, from 20 years, 30 years now? Yeah. So it's quite impressive that 30 years of reflection about the question of reuse, and I believe their work is also reflects this knowledge, this experience, this research they were involved in. Oito is, the partners are João, Laura, Diogo, and Nuno. They all studied here in the faculty, in the School of Porto, in somehow, with different experiences. And of course, myself as also a teacher here in the school, it's a great pleasure to have you here and to listen to you. So, thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. So I'm Sophie de Vriend, and I work at Agora. We're a Brussels-based office. We mainly work in Belgium, and as Nuno said in the intro, we work a lot with renovations, transformations, sometimes new buildings, but we deal a lot with the existing. And so today I named the conference Rethinking the Built Reality because I brought to you two projects that I wanted to present that are both transformations, renovations, and that deal with very specific contextual issues that are quite specific for Belgium, but I think there will still be some parallels to be drawn in other cases. So it's a picture of our office. We're about 20 people, and we mainly work on public buildings. We don't do so much housing, but we do quite a varied types of projects in size and scale as well. And as an introduction, I just wanted to show you a few projects, a few images, to sort of let you get to know us and to sort of put on the table some themes that are quite important for us and that come back in quite a lot of projects. For example, Prins Dries here is a project where also, as Nuno said, it's for us about asking the right question. The client here, a school, they asked to build a canopy for their playground. And we were thinking, we were looking at the site and we were saying, well, don't you rather need like some more playground? And so we proposed this canopy that is a canopy, but that also becomes a second layer of playground and thus doubles the size of the playground in one go. Here, ECAM is the transformation of the former ECAM site. It's a school site on the inside of a large building block. And we had to create an entrance from the street to this inside of the building block, which is the part that you see in the middle of the photo, the glazed volume. And so the house that used to be there had to be demolished because the fire guards have to be able to enter into the site. And at the same time, we had to stabilize the existing situation now, this new situation, because we have to make sure that the walls don't fall down. And for us, this was kind of an opportunity. So for us, it's also always about opportunity. And we proposed to insert very low cost, almost like a greenhouse volume on top of it. And you can see the structure in like the cross in behind the glass facades, which is the stabilizing beams that hold the houses up on the sides. But by creating this envelope around it, we suddenly can create some sort of like a multifunctional space that can be used by the community and then suddenly can give this additional function to the neighborhood. Another theme, it's structure. So we really enjoy thinking about structure, about intelligent structures. And for this one, it's an old warehouse that we transformed into a house. And here the existing concrete structure had to be reinforced. And we did a lot of going back and forth, but in the end we proposed to reinforce it with wood, which is a bit contradictory because wood is a light material and concrete is not. But in the end it works, and it gives this very architectural definition of the spaces. And it defines the spaces really well, and it's always an interesting thing to think about, that the structure can also create the architecture of the space. And then finally, Chapix, it's a very large scale, it's our biggest project, it's a very large scale exposition halls in Charleroi, it's a city in the south of Belgium. And here for us, it's about use and appropriation, I think. These kind of buildings, it's from the 70s, and they used to host big fairs in these buildings, but now they don't use them so much anymore, and so the city is left with a huge building and they don't really know what to do with it. So they actually asked to demolish a part of the building and to construct this new passive volume that could be added to this existing building. But rather, we propose to demolish not a building, but the facades of the building. So a part of the interior becomes an exterior space, because in this way, the city that is close by can be connected with the inside of the building, and the geography can be, the topography can be adapted. And suddenly the interpretation of the space becomes completely different, and it creates new possibilities that weren't there before, but at the same time it says almost nothing has changed. If you look at the building, a lot of the original elements are still there. It's just by changing one thing that suddenly the building becomes very different. And yeah, as a last introduction, this is a competition that we did with MOOC-PZ from Germany. It was a competition, we lost it, but still we think that the things that we were talking about at the time have really been seeping through in our project since then. And so the question was to create a sustainability campus for the universities in Brussels in a former military building. And so the university, at the competition brief, they gave us this historical analysis of the neoclassical buildings that had a lot of value, that should be kept, etc. And then there's also a lot of postmodern buildings on site. And basically what they said is those are of less value and you can sort of do whatever you want, you can demolish them, etc. And during the conversations that we had, and we were thinking, if they want a sustainability campus, then what's really sustainable? Is it demolishing things and creating these new kind of super insulated plastic-filled volumes? It's something that we don't really adhere to, and so we created these images as some sort of manifest in saying that there is no ugly or bad, there is no good or bad in architecture, but the existing is what is there, and let's try to do something out of it and use these buildings until their full potential. The client didn't agree. So Kattenveld is the first project that I wanted to show you today. It's a renovation, a transformation of former office building into a secondary school. It's an image of the project. So we're in Molenbeek. It's west of the city center of Brussels. And as you can see from the image, it's quite a heterogeneous area. You have these very large remnants of industrial activity. Some have moved out, some are still active, but at the same time you have also this really small-scale housing. And then you have this office building that's sort of put back from the street, which is also sort of a atypical element in the surroundings. And so I brought this image because office buildings, it's quite a problem in Brussels in the sense that we have a lot of them and there's a lot of them that are empty. So a few years ago, this organization created this sort of humoristic campaign about a municipality that they named Sint-Wie-de-Leegbeek. So Brussels consists of 19 municipalities, and they sort of invented this 20th municipality, saying that actually if you count up all of the square meters of empty office spaces, you sort of get the surface of a whole municipality in Brussels that's completely empty. And so Sint-Wie-de-Leegbeek, it refers to the names of communities, the municipalities in Brussels, and Wied, it means empty, so it's kind of a reference to this and to sort of bring this to the surface. And it's part of the history of Belgium, this question about office buildings. So in the 60s and 70s, you had a lot of changes in the city, you had a lot of protests as well. So this is one in an area in the center of the city. Because at the time, politicians, they really wanted to demolish large parts of the cities. They did in certain parts to construct these new Manhattan-like office towers. There were a lot of protests at the time, and still people now, we're left with these buildings and we don't really know what to do with them. So then comes in the project, because the project emerged out of an emergency. Because the municipalities that surround this site had a lot of growth in population. They didn't have a secondary school that was French-speaking on their area, and so they said we need to create a new secondary school in the municipality. And they found the site of the office building, which was actually quite interesting for them. And so they started up a first competition phase, which we entered. And this is a photo from the first site visit, where we were immediately charmed by the quality, the architectural quality of the building and this nice prefabricated concrete structure. On the inside as well, we were quite nicely surprised. You could say on the image on the left that it's quite a horrible corridor with small dark offices. But at the same time, the quality of the material was really good. And also the fact that it was this concrete structure, it actually meant that we had an exoskeleton, so the facades were load-bearing and the platforms are completely empty, which is really a very interesting and flexible thing to work with. So in this first phase, the idea was to try and open up a school on site as soon as possible, so everything had to go as quick as possible, and it only concerned one of the wings, so this one. And the other one was then left for the second phase. So the idea was the school can start up as soon as possible, and at the same time the construction site would be ongoing next to it. And so we had 3 interventions. The first one was about these materials, the partition walls that we saw in the photo. Because it was such high quality, we were thinking a school doesn't have the same budget as the people who used the building before, so let's reuse these things. Also, in the idea that this might be quicker, in the end it was absolutely not the case, but still I think the idea stays, we're still behind the idea. And so we reused all of these materials. And then we had to find a way to sort of complete these partition walls, which we did by using one kind of material. It's multiplex, so wood like this, to sort of mark also where we left our traces. So we made some sketches, and in color you can see the new elements that we added. And then everything that's in white is either existing or reused materials. And then, of course, you have to really do it. So then the work really begins, because you have to measure everything, you have to inventorize everything, you have to be very precise, you have to check if it's feasible. You have to take into account that maybe when demounting that some elements might get broken, so you have to build in some safety measures. And also for the contractor, it's quite difficult because they have to be really careful when demounting stuff. They have to stock everything. They also have to inventorize everything. And at some point during the construction, they had a worker that was always almost full-time moving stuff from one side to the other, because you need a lot of space to store this stuff. So this photo from the construction site, so you can see that instead of the central corridor that we used to have before, we decided to put the corridor on one side of the building. This way suddenly we have a really nice illuminated corridor, and then on the other side we can create larger spaces that are more adapted to a school building. And then this is when it's finished, and you can see on the ground these sort of power outlets that used to be inside office spaces, but now, of course, it's become a corridor. We decided to leave them there as it is because it's cheaper to not do anything, but also in the idea that the flexibility of the building stays intact, because if in some years the school decides that they have a different kind of space needed, then they can also really quickly readapt the partition walls. And then maybe at some point these power outlets can become useful again. And a photo from inside the classroom to the corridor. And then the second intervention is a new entryway. So the fact that we were only touching one of the wings of the building meant that we had to create a new entrance to the school and also mark this entrance so that it would be clear for everyone. And we decided to use this really cheap hydrofuge wood because it's cheap and it's easily demountable. It's easily to build stuff with it. And in this first phase, we didn't know what was going to happen in the second phase. And it was an ideal solution to say, let's use a material of which we know that if in some way this in the next phase has to be adapted, then it can be easily taken down, be used for something else, or be built up somewhere else. So it's very flexible. And then the same thing for the staircase that you saw in the first photo. So also this cheap wood, which is demountable. And this staircase was necessary as a fire safety measure. And often these kind of staircases are really small in a corner of a building, but here we decided to put it at a really important space in the school. It connects all of the corridors to the playground. And in this way it becomes this kind of central element in the building where all of the students can meet each other, and suddenly it gets a lot of value. And then at some point the second phase started. So another competition, we entered again and we won again. So you can see in the front of the photo the wing that was treated in the first phase, and then the proposition in the back. So there's a second existing wing, and then we proposed this elongated volume at the back of the photo. So to get back to the site and the surroundings, you have in blue these industrial buildings that I was talking about earlier, and then on the street side you have this very small-scale housing along the street. And what really interests us in this site was actually what's in black. It's the party wall that's separating these elements from this construction site. And so we proposed to create this volume that was going from the front of the plot up until the back of the plot. For a few different reasons: to activate this party wall, also to keep as much open space open for the playground of the school, and also to create some visibility to the streets, because the building was so back from the street, it was really difficult to know what was happening. And so by putting this volume there, it can suddenly create some visibility in the street. Also, what we find super important is to create buildings that are readable and where people can easily orient itself. So here as well, the volume was quite interesting to guide people to the main entrance of the building. And then lastly, one of the elements that we had to integrate in the program was a sports hall. We put it at the front, so to the street side, because this way actually we can separate the school and the sports hall very easily, which means that suddenly during the evenings, the weekends or the holidays, the school can be closed, but the sports hall can be open to the neighborhood, and it can again be this kind of social bonus that can be given to the neighborhood. So the construction site took place when the school was on site, which was quite difficult. So we had to think about this kind of musical chair together with the school, together with the contractor, to see at some point the school would be there and the construction site would be somewhere else, and then it would switch and then it would evolve. Also, because it was a new school, every year 100 new students arrived on site, so the school was growing bigger and bigger, but of course the construction site was also very important. In the end we managed. It was not easy for the school, but everyone did a lot of effort, and luckily it turned out really well. So an important factor because of that was that everything had to be done as quickly as possible, as cheap as possible as well, but as quick as possible was really important. And so we had to think about important decisions to make in the existing building. And one of them that was really important for us was to create a common ground floor, because the existing wing was at about 1 meter above ground, and this is very difficult to create an accessible building. So we decided to demolish this elevated ground floor and to create a new one on the real ground floor. And at the same time also to create a bigger entrance to the building. And then here are some photos from the new wings touching the existing building. And so you can see this kind of T-shaped, and at the cross of the T is this new entrance hall. So you can see left is a photo of the existing entry hall of the office building, and then suddenly for a school, of course, it has to be a different size, different measures, and it becomes this really big space where again we were inspired by the staircase that we did in the first phase, because this seemed like a very important element to us in the school, and so we again created this very large staircase where all of the students can meet each other. So you can see here is a plan of the first floor, where all of the classrooms are joining also in the center of the T, where then you have this large hall space with the big staircase. And then a third staircase again, to create space that's a bit oversized, but that is adapted to the program. And so we continued this inventory of reuse of materials. The materials were a bit different, but the tactics were more or less the same. And so some photos from the construction site. So you can see again the wood of the new elements that we added, and the gray is actually the existing materials that we reused. And then once in use, it looks like this. And then on another floor, the partition walls have a different color. So, of course, working with existing materials, it means that you don't really have the choice. You have so many elements in this color and then so many in this color, and it's sort of, well, I guess some people might find it annoying that there's no coherence, but I think this adds actually to the character and the identity of the building, because this is what the building used to be, and we reused it in a different way, but it's still sort of showing the history of the building. And some photos from the new class wing. And this is the sports hall. And then a second project I wanted to show you is not a typical architecture project. It's a conceptual study. We handed it in officially on Monday, so it's a recent project. And it's a study that has the aim of thinking about the future of a housing block. So to situate, we are in Ghent. We're in the north of Ghent, close to the harbor. And we have two blocks. So this one is the largest apartment block. And then here you have a smaller one. And then you have a shared green space around it. And it's really very peculiar, as you can see in the photo, because it's surrounded by industry. It's only industrial activities that are around this housing block, and it's sort of an island in between this mass of industry. So this is a view from the common green space, which is really quite interesting as a space, but it's not really very used. And this is more the reality that the building is in, so you can see the higher building on the right, and then the industry that completely eats up all of the surroundings of the building. It's a high volume, so it's visible from a large distance, but it also has a big distance from the building to the city. So it's surrounded by really big traffic roads by this industry, and there's a lot of complexities that make that it's really difficult for the people who live there to go to the city. And you might ask how this building ended up in this zone. So going back to the 60s, there was a master plan that was made for this site, which you can see the building are here. And it was actually the idea to create low-cost housing for workers that then would go work in the port of Ghent or in the industry surrounding it. And they wanted to build 10 blocks. In the end, they only built this part. And then bit by bit, the industry took over and took away all of the leftover space that was surrounding these blocks. Things are changing, however. So you can see in yellow on the bottom left, you have the city center of Ghent. And then on the top right is the port of Ghent that's more and more moving outside of the city. And of course, the question was, what can we do with this area? So a master plan was made by OMA already quite a while back to think about the way of redeveloping this space. And so a lot of large-scale projects were proposed and are being already built now, which means that things are changing around this building. So it's sort of a moment also to think about the future of this building. And this was also one of the reasons that this conceptual study came to take place now. So it's a question that came from the city of Ghent and the region of Flanders. And really to think about what can we do with this building. So there's this context that's really rapidly evolving, and at the same time, the building, it's a post-war building, and it's in urgent need of renovation, with the complexity that the city is actually not an owner of the building. So it's a privately owned building. There's 224 apartments, and there's about 200 owners that own the building, which makes it really difficult to do anything with it. So here you can see a photo of the building. As you can see, renovation is really necessary. So we focused the plan of, like the master plan of the renovation of this building on 3 axes, which is energy transition, safety, and comfort of living. With the problem that, this is a graph showing the income categories of the people owning these apartments, and of which the blue, so the bottom part, takes up 70%, and it's the lowest income class that you can have in Belgium. And the red is the middle class, and green is the highest class. So in fact, it's owned by really poor people that have, for some reason, been able to buy these apartments, but don't have anything to spare to invest in their building. So, as I said, it's a building that's really visible from a lot of parts in Ghent, and it means that it's also quite known, but it has more of a negative connotation for a lot of people, because a lot of poor people are living there, because a lot of people think it's a really ugly building, but at the same time we find it has a lot of values as well. I think the implementation is super interesting, and I would argue that it has the best view over the city of all of Ghent. But of course there's problems. The entries are really small, in a bad shape. The access roads are not very inviting, and of course there's this problem of the big traffic roads surrounding the site. So you can see, not ideal. But at the same time, again, some people might find this quite ugly, and we find it actually quite an interesting facade, which made us think of the projects of Lacaton and Vazel, who did quite a few projects where they renovate these post-war apartment buildings by adding a layer of transparent space, which suddenly makes it possible to create these apartments that benefit from a lot of light. And actually, this is a photo from inside one of the apartments. They already have it today. And again, this view is really spectacular, so they also really have something that a lot of people would envy. The balconies as well are really have quite a lot of potential. They are, of course, in need of urgent repair, but at the same time, they're really quite nice. The facades as well, they're in a bad shape, but they're super easy to renovate, so there's pros and cons everywhere. And also in the organization of the plan, so there's only a few types of apartment buildings and apartment types, sorry. And they're organized super efficiently. There's almost no space that is lost, and it's quite compact, but it's very qualitative. So the sequence of the space is really quite nice. And also the green space around it has a lot of potential. It's not used that much at the moment, but green space is hard to find in Ghent, and this one is really of a high quality. So what we did is we wanted to set up a participative process with the inhabitants, but also with experts from different fields. And by doing so, trying to collect information of where we could sort of develop a project by this participative process. So to speak with the inhabitants, we created these thematic posters where we drew these possible futures of the building, and then some text balloons with statements that could get a conversation going. People could agree or not agree, but at least they would have something to say about it. And these discussions, it was quite complicated because, as I said, there's 200 owners in the building coming from 70 different nationalities, so it's very difficult to reach a big amount of these people. There's a lot of mistrust as well because of the history of the building, so it's really difficult to get to know these people and to gain their confidence. We were invited as well in some of the apartments, which of course was really interesting, but then as an architect you really fall short, and you realize that to realize these kind of projects you need a team with a lot of other competences to make it possible to create these kind of buildings. It's not just an architect that can say you should do this, but you need a lot more to be able to realize these projects. And so we did a lot of propositions. There was also some students that did some propositions. And so this is a drawing. Here are the buildings, where the student, she tried to map the neighborhood of these people. So you can see horizontally is a really big traffic road. And then you see like these small areas along this road, which is actually functions that they use. So you can see the neighborhood for these people is super disparate, it's super elongated, and it's not this typical kind of neighborhood where you would have everything really close by and you could do everything on foot. So it's quite a contrast to what we're used to seeing. Some students also proposed more like these small interventions that can make a big difference. For example, here, gaining access to the garden, meeting space, rethinking the entry halls and the corridors, access to the rooftops, etc. Creating larger balconies to benefit the fire safety and the comfort of the inhabitants. Rethinking the ground floor and the entrance to the building. And then some technical propositions and solutions. And then also thinking about the larger picture. So as I said, there is this master plan that's developing around it, and the question of the city and the region was also to think about what can we implement in these master plans so that these buildings itself would also benefit from it, which has never been done up until that point, because it's always been looking from the city towards this developing area, but never looking from inside these buildings to what they could benefit from. So we proposed things like services that could be added, or more housing so that the neighborhood would become more lively, etc. Few propositions and sketches. But again, of course, all of this seems super trivial if you realize that the people are just not able to pay these kind of works. So you can, as an architect, again, propose all of the solutions, but actually, as long as they don't have the money, nothing can get done. And so this graph, it's 23% that you can see on the bottom. It's people that receive extra benefits from the government, but in reality what it means is that these are really people that are in very precarious situations and really don't have anything to spare and have a hard time paying the electricity, etc. every month. Again, there were also some people who did have some resources and already renovated part of the building. So you can see in green the apartments that we checked that already did some works. And then, of course, it becomes super difficult to renovate something, because discussions become really difficult when someone says, I have already invested money and I'm not going to pay for anyone else's renovation. So apart from the fact that you have so many owners that have to approve decisions, you also get this extra level of complexity. And then this kind of a scheme to explain the financial aspect. So we made a proposition. We sort of estimated it would cost this much to put the building back up to current standards. And of course, if you divide it by the amount of owners, it's impossible for them to pay it. And you can't really work in a classical way where you would then ask subsidies and then suddenly you are able to pay it, because it just doesn't deduce enough of the cost for them to be able to pay it. So the approach here was to propose and research a lot of different solutions, a lot of different options and possibilities, and hoping that in this way all of the different bits could then deduce the amount to suddenly a smaller amount. So this is the original budget. These are the different solutions, and then hoping that at some point this sum becomes small enough for that people can actually afford it. So there's a lot of different things that can be done. They can think about creating new developments as well as a building on site, but the problem here is that they don't really have very useful sites. So because of the industry that's surrounding the building, it's a safe zone, so it means that you can't really build because of the safety hazards. But at the same time, the city has some plots around these buildings, and you can think of a solution of switching parcels with the different actors on site, so that everyone can benefit, and then suddenly you can create a plot for this building to create an extra development that would then create money for them to invest in the building. And then another thing that we proposed to the city was seeing this as a vertical neighborhood. Because if you take 224 apartments and you put them in a standard Belgian horizontal neighborhood, it's a really big plot. The city invests a lot of money in making roads, garbage collection, electricity, etc., and they don't invest in these kind of neighborhoods. So by seeing this as a neighborhood, the city could also decide to invest a certain amount of money in these kind of buildings, which would still then be less money than if you would have a traditional horizontal neighborhood. So again, it's this kind of change of point of view that can suddenly change the way that they organize their subsidies, their finances, etc. So in conclusion, some photos. For us, it's quite atypical to do these kind of projects because it's not a real architecture project. And of course, it's a pity that you don't really realize it, but I think the important thing of this study is to show to the government what the problems are, what the possibilities are, and to show them that this is not a singular situation, but there are so many housing blocks in Belgium that suffer from the same conditions, and by rethinking these problems, we can sort of evolve into a more inclusive practice of renovating these kind of buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie. Right on time. João?
Yeah. So, I would like to start by thanking Therese and Luis for the very kind invitation. Also, thanking Nuno for his extremely generous words. And I'd like to congratulate Sophie for the compelling presentation. No. There is a problem. This is not the right file. This is a trial version. There's a new one from... Okay. So, at first, this was a finding. The acknowledgement of a big part of the city, of the ground floor spaces of the city, were looking like this. This was 2017. Me and my partners were just returning to Porto, me after 16 years abroad. This is probably the reason why it was easier for me to acknowledge this, to see this. More or less at the same time, a number of articles were talking about this housing crisis we are here talking today. The rise of prices, the lack of housing for affordable housing, the rents were too high, the pressure of tourism. And within this context, you have to remember that for the past 40 years, we as a society tried to address the problem building peripheries, things that we know addressed the problem but created even more problems. And basically, these kind of solutions neglected or forgot the built city that we already had and that was there to be used. Let's go back again to 2017. After a long time of abandoned, the city center were now full of tourists that brought a lot of energy, a lot of economic power to this very restricted area, which is the city center of Porto. And over here, of course, ground floor spaces work. There can be shops, there can be cafes, there can be restaurants, they work. There is critical mass for them. So this is not a problem over there. In the meantime, the national income goes up, but in a very slow rate, and it does not follow the pressure that the market was putting on the houses prices. And so in this context, the postcard city was looking good, whereas as soon as you were to move from the city center, this very restricted city center, slightly uphill, you would find this. And it's not one example, or 4, or 12, it's hundreds of them. And they are all around us, and we just need to look at them and see them, realize they exist. And so, at the time, we didn't have a lot of work, so we could dedicate some hours for our research. And so we said, let's take a chunk of the city. This is this rectangle you can see within the city center, and let's look at it closely. And we did a very thorough research, investigation, mapping all of the ground floor spaces and their conditions. So between Rua da Constituição, Serpa Pinto, São Dinis, and Cunha Júnior, we understood that there were a lot of ground floor spaces with more or less the same conditions. So they were leveled with the street, they had a backyard, they were sitting in buildings with 2, 3, 4-story high with apartments on top, and they were abandoned or neglected. And so these are the stats. So basically out of 581 ground floors, 173 were underused, vacant, abandoned, or empty. This means 30% of them were waiting for an opportunity. 30% of them, making some simple math, corresponds to 22,000 square meters, waiting without use. So let's take this to the city scale. This chunk of the city corresponds to 1/50 of the city. So we would come with this figure, 1,125,000 square meters built, infrastructured, but vacant. So we have been drinking the bottle is not full, but it could be full. And if we fill the bottle, we get and we multiply, we divide the number we saw of square meters by the average square meter of a 2-bedroom apartment or a 3-bedroom apartment, we could build over 15,000 2-bedroom apartments or 12,000 3-bedroom apartment in less than a year period. This represents 62,000 new residents that could come to the city center and use spaces that already exist. More sustainable than this you cannot get. And we have to see that these numbers and this kind of works do not require long bureaucratic periods because they are mainly interior refurbishments, and the works are simple interior refurbishments. So 62,000 new residents corresponds more or less to 1/3 of the current Porto population. But we had to illustrate this to show people what we meant. And so we started making illustrations of how the ground floors look today on the left-hand side and how they could look on the right-hand side. And we did one after the other, and we showed that the gardens could be visible when they are on the side, how to deal with the privacy issues and the entrance issues and the car parking issues or bicycle parking issues, and the transparency and the light that corresponds to a safer street contribution, or the appropriation of the sidewalks, and so on and so on. And so from the city that today looks like this, or at the time looked like this, it could become like this. And in this moment, we spoke to people, to colleagues, to clients, to people that were looking for a house, and they all said, fantastic, looks fantastic, great, I love it, but I'm not sure. So there was a lot of skepticism. Does this really work? Can you do this going through the bureaucratic problems that the city will ask you for? Is a ground floor house comfortable? Will I have my privacy insured? What kind of spaces do I have inside? Do you have moist inside? Is it heat? So we didn't have any positive feedback on this. So we had to go for and test them and make case studies. The first two case studies, 1 and 2, are next to Marquês, so 5 minutes away from metro station. For me, it's very city center. For someone that lives in Porto, it might look like periphery. It's not, it's city center. And then the third one, it's in Rua de Serralves, 20 meters away from the Parque de Serralves. The first one became a co-working space and also an office space. It's our office space right now, partially. And the second and the third became houses with a garden. Case study number 1, Armazenco work. On top, the pictures as it was when we found it, as found condition, and more or less the same points of view how it became. So the backyard was already there. It was a question of cleaning and completing through 200 square meters of a garden in the back. The street side needed some refurbishment, but not that much. And then the inside, of course, some infrastructure, electricity mainly, and then some finishings. Street side, the gates were there, the gates stood there. We just took away the corrugated metal sheet and changed it into an open mesh. The interior space, a huge general space that was abandoned since 25th of April 1974. This might sound familiar, this date for the Portuguese in this room. Another picture from the inside, the backyard. So an axle that shows how we organize the space inside. Let's see. Starting with refurbishment or the works pictures. So a lot of infrastructure on the ceilings and under the floor. Cork as an insulation that was left raw only with some white paint. We had the privilege to work with fine carpenters. We still have the amazing possibility that in the most parts of Europe it's not possible anymore to work with local professionals that are extremely skillful, and they cannot certify their products, but who cares? Working with them, we can take advantage of passive systems like natural ventilation, reducing the amount of costs for machines and ventilations and so on. The interior of the space, the cork that I was talking about before on the ceiling, insulating the ceiling towards the terrace on top. The entrance space and the existing metal gates with their existing opening system, only the mesh was new. And this entrance filter space that allows you to leave your bicycle before you go to work, or to make a small or fast phone call before you go in, and that mediates the inside from the outside. Inside, and then it works also as being a place which is not fully private. It works as a social connector. We organize some events, some parties, and people come. And in this one, we had over 300 people in the Asian picnic markets. Very nice afternoon. Case study number 2. So an house in an abandoned ground floor space. Again, before and after. The street side closed for more than 10 years before we took it. Zero contribution to the safety of the street, zero contribution at any level, also for the condominium on top. The interior space, again, super generous heights, generous structure, and huge potential in relation to the backyard. And this brings me to a general topic, which is the soil permeability. In the back, we found this potential nice backyard, fully cemented. And recently, some of you might remember these images. This is not Bangladesh, but this is Porto some months ago. And it's a question that everyone will need to address sooner or later. Of course, this is part of the requirements of the city right now. If you refurbish a space like this, you are forced to make the backyard permeable again. So this can be also an opportunity for the city to take these spaces and to make them permeable again, avoiding these problems. Again, back to the research, we found them in the backyard, always like this, cement or some roofs, cement, zero permeability in the backyard. This is us, case study number 2. And again, the vision how these backyards could become a house with a garden in the in the center of the city, not in the periphery, 15 minutes away with a car, but 5 minutes away from the metro station. And so this is us, case study number 2. This was a promise, and the promise was more or less kept. And to get to the final work, there is, of course, a small bureaucratic delay. We have to submit the process to the city, and we have to wait some time, sometimes more, sometimes less. And so some words in different languages, because in other countries this is very normal. A temporary use, uso intermédio, Zwischennutzung, Here it's very strange still. Well, while we were waiting for the city to say yes to our refurbishment requirement or request, a friend of ours asked us if we knew some space that we could bring his workshop inside. And we said, we have a space. When we have the license, you'll have to leave. But he said, that's great. And they had their workshop here for 1 year for a highly symbolic rent a month, only to pay the expenses, electricity and water. We were happy because they were taking care of the space. They were happy because they could also have their kids with a swimming pool in the backyard while they were working. And so this is also a general topic that comes together with the fact that we can reuse the ground floor spaces. Typologically, we have usually big depths. We have to bring light inside. We have to organize a limited facade, in this case towards the backside. And so we refer to this very well-known project to try to maximize the amount of spaces that could get light from the backside. And some pictures from the construction, reused stones from a demolished parapet, interior that was against the floor, so we needed to ensure that the floor was not humid, cold, or with moist, but we had to address that question to make it comfortable. Again, insulation towards the neighbors in the outside areas, fair face bricks to improve acoustics and to minimize costs, cheap palette of materials, and a GIF that shows how it was and how it became. From the inside, this filter space between inside and outside. On the other side, again, the room towards the street with curtains and timber shutters, the way you can mediate your relation to the outside. Final pictures inside. And the backyard, a house with a garden, 200 square meters house inside, 150 as an outside space. Third case study. Rua de Serralves, 20 meters away from the Park de Serralves. This is much narrower than the one we saw before, and even deeper than the one we saw before. When we study architecture, there's always, when we talk about depth, the famous 24 meters of the unité d'habitation, the difficulty of organizing things in the depth. Well, in this case, we didn't choose it. It was 30 meters. The section that allows you to understand that in this case we had a garage, common garage under the ground floor, and the 3 stories apartments on top. Inside, as we found it, and the promise illustration on the left-hand side. So, floor plan is found. Again, we had to somehow structure the depth of the space, otherwise it would be very difficult to live inside in such a space. So we needed a filter space to welcome you, to allow you to move away from the narrow sidewalk, to drop your bicycle, and to leave your umbrella. A street side room, again with curtains to mediate your relation to the outside. It could also be an office space with a side entrance directly to this filter space. Inner space in the very middle of the building can be a playroom, an office. And then we needed some typological element that could lead you from the front to the rear. So we introduced this atrium space. It's not a corridor. It's a very wide corridor defined as a room that can be, again, used in different ways. On both sides of this atrium space, you find alcoves and the services. Toilets that get natural light through overhead windows on top of the doors. And then we had this very strange structural system, highly pragmatic, the black dots, and we had to give some kind of logic to it, and we introduced 3 other non-bearing columns, designing a portico. And then the portico leads you to the main space, and the main space leads you to the outside room, outside covered room, carved inside the floor plan, so that you can have, in Porto it rains a lot, so you can have your breakfast, your lunch, or dinner being outside, but in a covered condition. And then, of course, 30 square meter private courtyard, and then more or less 200 square meters common condominium garden that is also up to you if you want to use it. Again, a reference talking about typology and geometry, and this project showed us how geometry can be helpful to emphasize the relation between inside and outside, and also to create transparency between internal rooms so that you can have, again, maximize the amount of light that comes from a limited, narrow facade. Another general topic on these ground floors, the reuse of elements. We saw before on the case study number 2, this back facade as it was, we had to demolish these parapets so that we can get more light inside, and this is how it became. And the parapets were made out of granite, and this was used to make this paved area as we saw. The metal gates, as I said before, are the same, simply reused by the change of the corrugated metal sheet. While we were building the co-working space, there was the demolishment of a building next door, and we saved some doors and we used them for the toilets. We also did that on case study number 2. Christina Gage was visiting that case study number 2, and after that she called us and she said, I'm making a project in Avenida dos Aliados. They are going to demolish hundreds of doors. If you want to go by and save something, I know you are interested in this, go for it. And we went there. There were, in fact, a lot of beautiful doors. We saved a lot of them, and particularly this one that is probably design of Marques da Silva, the architect of the building. She's refurbishing right now. And we used it in Serralves in this condition. And funny, it's 20 meters away from Casas de Serralves, where Marques da Silva left also his legacy. So it's kind of going back home. Finally, open facade for safe streets. This is another important topic. The visual permeability that the city needs versus domestic privacy. There is no contradiction between these two. You can have both of them. You should do both of them. Of course, you don't want to be seen naked inside, or most of us would not like to do that. So you need to ensure your privacy, but at the same time, the city needs to see inside. The neighbor, and then this is the life of an architect, the neighbor, very nice guy, once stopped me when we were almost finishing the works, and he said, he was a bit puzzled, and I understood he was concerned about something, and he said, you know, we like you, you are doing your work, but you know, I saw the facade, the gate, and it looks like an hen house. We will never please everyone. I mean, and maybe he's right, and it's not beautiful. We use it for the reasons I described, and we see some qualities on this. Maybe there's another way of doing this, but it's proven to be helpful in different situations. To finish, these 3 projects are absolutely meaningless. They are impactless. If we go towards a large scale, if we transform this into 1,000 ground floor projects, then they can modify the genetic code of the city. I agree with Inês this morning. She said we think it's better if we have bigger plots and bigger projects to have a stronger impact on the city. This is one way of doing this. The other way is to multiply small-scale projects and to transform the genetic code of the city. So putting a bit of reuse, addressing soil permeability, making open facades and safer streets, dealing with temporary use for those that cannot afford expensive atelier spaces, and using a social connector, I think we can change the DNA of the city. This is us. I would like to thank mainly Eloise and Nicole for her fantastic engagement on the research of Reground, and of course, Francesca, Marta, Vasco, Miguel, and Maria, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, João. I told you that this would be interesting. So thank you, Sophie. Thank you, João. Before passing to you, I was thinking about this morning and with your presentation, are we in a kind of a new functionalism era where architects again are kind of process strategists more than formal design through formal solutions. Where our also, that's why when Sophie was somehow telling us in the last project that she showed us that, well, this is not an architectural project, isn't it an architectural project, what you showed us? Or and the basis of the first slides that João showed us, also that the research in somehow the basis of the reflection, the question of the scale, where in this point of the problem that put us as architects that are very engaged in doing projects. I believe that's we really like to do, but we've seen here also, besides doing projects, information, diagnosis, matter, reality, analyzing realities that somehow driven the answers, and not the traditional model references through opposing to this reality. So this is it's not a question, but I'd like to comment on this. Where are we standing?
It's not easy to answer this. I'm not a big theorist. Of course, it's an architectural project, but it's not a classical kind of architectural project. It's doing things differently, and I think what's important is that you need these kind of projects to make a change. And in this case, the last one, the housing block, of course, it's quite abstract. It's talking about numbers, negotiating with governments, etc. But in some cases this works, but in some cases, build projects, they work really well, like the example with it's only 3 projects, but it's also already something that can show and convince people that these things work. And I think it's the same thing with the school that I showed. So this idea of reusing the materials, I think if we would have said to the direction of the school, we're going to reuse the material and it's going to be super nice, they would be quite hesitant. But it was because this first phase of the project was about opening up the school as quick as possible, and then we'll see what happens after. That the direction we came to them with this proposal, and they were like, yeah, we'll see, and you can do whatever you want, and we'll see after. And it's once that it's built that they can see, this actually works quite well, and that you can sort of convince someone of an idea that you have in your head. But you need the built thing it's a lot easier in any case to convince people once they can see the physical effect of the project.
I think the question, being an architect, is whether you are willing to engage with the client's problem, if you are willing to understand the social questions around the project, if you are willing to invest yourself in the project, and then there will be always space for your talent and the skills that you certainly have in terms of design, but you shouldn't start with that. You should start with a very humble position of being someone that is has the possibility to understand the problem and to translate it into something and give an answer. And the answer doesn't necessarily need to be very expressive, very visible, very fancy. Well, it might be, or maybe it's not, and doesn't need to be that. And so if we are functionalists, or I think working with, in a serious way, understanding there is a problem, and maybe around the problem that the clients or someone told you that there is to be solved, maybe you find other problems and you can also address those problems that were not part of the equation in the first place, but you have the capacity to put them into play as well.
Thank you. I totally agree with you. So I will leave you to. I'm sure that you have many questions and these presentations really motivated you to ask João and Sophie. No? Yeah? This one?
Hello. Thank you so much. My name is Julia. I'm here from the CCA in Montreal. I wanted to ask you both, and maybe also the Ines from the session before, how in your work do you plan with changing social structures, changing routines, changing values when looking at how you plan housing or places where we live together? It's my first question, because we are planning for a future, and nuclear family structures are breaking up, and values are rapidly changing, and we all grow older. So the ground floor proposal, actually, I was thinking this is genius, because we will all need ground floors, because we will not have escalators, and we should not have elevators, and we should move more, but we will also be alone, and we need people to check in with us. So how best you can check in while walking along the street and looking through the window, and maybe it's just a conversation that will help us to continue. So basically my question is, how do you plan in your work with these social norms and rituals that are changing?
It's difficult, of course. I think, well, being from a background that's mostly about public buildings and less about housing, I think the social aspect is always quite important in our projects. And I touched on a few subjects in the projects that I showed. So, for example, having this opportunity in the school to have this sports hall that can be a meeting space for the neighborhood as well, that the neighborhood can use. Having this extra space that we created on top of the entrance that I showed in the beginning. These are all spaces that were not asked, because when a client has a need of something, he thinks, of course, mainly first for himself. But you can always make propositions, and propositions that don't do any harm for the client, but that can benefit the neighborhood or the social cohesion. I think most of the clients are quite open to it, so it's thinking about doing well for everyone, not just for the client itself, but also always taking into account the larger context of the area where you're building in, and not just in an architectural way, but in a social way, and in a way that these buildings can be used by more than just the people that were building it for in the first place.
Yeah, and maybe to add even more pragmatic reasons, how do we react to these questions? It depends on the situation. If we are doing a project for controlled costs housing in Lisbon, we are also making a project next to the ones we saw this morning. So we are under a very strict and restrictive and narrow-minded legislation around or imposed by for this kind of programs. And so the margin you have to make something better or to address contemporary questions is extremely limited. Every time I see a colleague that manages to introduce something more within these very constraints or restricted limitations, I say chapeau, because it's really, really difficult. And then there are other situations, for example, these ground floor situations or a refurbishment of an existing building and so on, where you are also under strict legislation, but less narrow-minded, and so the margin to do something better, it's bigger. Of course, if you have an open-minded client, things go in a better direction. If the client wants to speculate and to make more profit, and that's the only purpose, then it's definitely more difficult. But our position is it's to be there and understanding what kind of opportunity is this that I have right now, and how much can I go deep into this reaction and introducing things that you were mentioning.
Thank you. More questions? We're arriving to the time for our coffee break, but there's one more question. Okay. There's a microphone arriving. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Christoph Wagner, Berlin. I have one question, Sean, to you. It's about the 3 case studies. It's very simple technical questions. You mentioned something like you identified more than 400 spots and said that 30% are empty on the ground. What is the reason for that? And is this in private property, each of these houses? And the second question, like the 3 case studies you presented, it's also about the property question. Is it rented? No, I guess it's also property. Or how did you convince these 3 owners or communities to get this project started?
So the first one, it could take an afternoon to discuss this, but to make a big story short, in the last 35 years, there was a radical change in society, in the way we live our lives. And some examples: we built in this city dozens of shopping malls before retail was on the ground floor. So the concentration of retail in these shopping malls, in big surfaces, left these spaces empty. Then industry, we had some industry, some logistics in the city. So these ground floor spaces were either commercial or storage warehouses. But production went away, China, India, elsewhere, and so logistics changed and they needed different spaces, and so these spaces were left behind. And then there's a lack of ideas, I guess, as well, because these spaces are generous, they are high, they are big, they have all sorts of qualities we saw, I think, in the presentation. At least I find there a lot of qualities. So I think there's a lack of ideas.
And there's not a friendly regulation,
Yeah,
also frame.
exactly. And then for the second question, the first case study, we needed, so as I said, I was 16 years abroad. I joined with some partners. We decided to form our office in Porto in 2017. We needed a space to work in, and we found this 400 square meter warehouse abandoned for the past 40-something years, with this extremely generous space in the back at a very affordable price. So this was private investment, and this is us being promoters of this space. And then on the second case, it's more or less at the same time, there was a friend of us that started working as a freelance in the co-working space, and she said, I want a house like this. And we had this project in our head, and then we did a research with her. We found the space, and we built a house for her in there. And then the third one was also a close person that saw this space as an investment and bought the space, and we did the project. So this is all private properties, and they make part of a condominium alongside with dwelling units on top. And so finally the condominium will have someone to discuss in the meeting rooms and in the assembly rooms, and to share expenses and to participate in the life of the building. Yeah.
There's one more question there. The microphone, please. Here.
Hello, I am Jorge Carvalho, and I have a question for Sophie, and it's about production. And I'm thinking about the production of the design and the production of the building itself. My astonishment is increased by my impression of Belgium as a country in the center of Europe, where industrialization took over since a long time. And these strategies that you showed implied that you have a more labor-intensive production, both in the design as well as in the construction of the building itself. And also bearing in mind that standards are more and more, let's say, oppressive, how in your country were you able to deal with this? I'm thinking how building information modeling is becoming almost compulsory, which is a tool that is more productive when you use standardized products that you assemble on your screen as a prediction of the assembly that happens in reality, again with standard products. So what difficulties did you have, for instance, in designing a school with probably lots of demands of fire safety, acoustic insulation? How with these existing materials were you able to deal with that? And how did you deal with the production system as a whole, where apparently this would not fit in easily?
It's a question that we receive quite often, actually. Yes, it's a lot more labor intensive. From our side, we don't get any extra money for it, so we do it out of common sense and out of the idea that we need to do something to make a change. And of course, also by doing it and by showing how much work it is, you can convince people that it is really an enormous amount of work. And you can maybe in the future more easily convince people that this should be rethought in the terms of work and time you spend on these things. And of course, also for the contractor, it's asking a lot of effort. Quite often, for the projects where we use these kind of strategies, quite often they say to the client, "Yeah, but for the same amount of money, we can give you something all new, and everything will be nice and new, and you'll be really happy about it." So quite often in the beginning of these construction sites, you really have to fight with these people and say, "No, we're going to do it this way," and then they get a bit angry. But then once that luckily for the times that we did it, in the end we managed to find sort of a common ground, and the contractor he followed us in this story. And we feel also that there's a lot of contractors are changing as well, actually. There's a lot of companies now that start to specialize in demounting things. There have been for a very long time contractors that are specialists in, for example, reusing chimneys, marble chimneys, and putting them somewhere else. So the act has always been there. It's just evolving a little bit, I think. And then in terms of standards, it's indeed very complicated. These building models, they weren't asked in the projects that we did, but we also have the difficulty that when we want to reuse a material and it's from the 70s and you can't even look up the company anymore because it doesn't exist anymore, and you have no idea to figure out what the composition or the qualities of the material is. So it is very difficult, and in this sense, these building models will be quite useful also in the reuse of materials in the future, because we will have these informations then. And in terms of standards like acoustic standards, for example, in the school, of course, if you look at the norms as they should be, these walls would not be useful because they wouldn't be up to the current standards. So what we proposed is that, so when you have the corridor and then you have the classrooms behind it, the walls that we reused are the walls that separate the corridor from the classrooms. And in the case of a school, you can say that either of the students are in the classrooms or they're in the corridors. And they're not, you rarely have an opportunity where some students are in a classroom really concentrated and you have a big group of students going through the classrooms. But then the walls that are separating the classrooms, these are new walls that are very highly acoustic, and in this case, the client, of course, has to agree with this kind of proposition. But there is a way of making propositions that, according to the project, can be quite intelligent in a sense that it's maybe not the rules, but maybe it's just as good in reality as it would be if you follow the rules. So in this way, we try to short-circuit these kind of problems, of course. But yeah, in any case, there's quite a lot of things that are really difficult to reuse in certain ways. For example, also something that's really easy to reuse is exterior windows, not as windows for the exterior, but you can really easily use them in the interior, because then the norms are, of course, different. And in this way, there's quite often always a way of thinking of a new mean of the product that maybe for a program that is not as specific as, well, let me phrase that again, maybe for a use that's not as, doesn't have as much specific need, but that can still be useful.
Thank you. We'll have to end. I will leave for myself and sharing with you these three ideas. One, project is a combat, as you saw, always a combat if you do it rightly. So, and we saw reality-driven projects, not ideas overposed to the reality. We saw reality-driven projects. Two, we need more than ideas, we need processes. And three, never as before, architecture needs to inform and feed politics. Never as before, architecture needs to inform and feed the politics. And I believe we saw here also very important examples of this combat and of this mission, I would say. So thank you for these inspiring examples and practices, and thank you.